In this lesson, we're going to learn the downward punch, or also called the low punch, in walking stance. So this technique here, just like when we do our high punch, in a walking stance, we tend to use a longer walking stance for this technique and kind of stretch it out to reach long. For downward punch, we do the same thing. We're using a long walking stance. So I've mentioned this before. What's the difference between a regular walking stance and a long walking stance? Well, if this is a regular walking stance, then long walking stance is just slightly further. And it's not a big deal. A little bit further and a little bit wider apart, slightly. There's very little difference between them. But it allows you to get a little bit lower down, and that allows you to get the downward punch into the target where it needs to go. So downward punch, you're not punching straight down. So you're not doing this. The target is not here. The target is here, in front of you. So, you can use this technique, for example, against a crouched or crouching opponent. So if somebody is down here and they're trying to return to their feet, they're in a crouch position, this would be ideal for downward punch. You wouldn't use this against an opponent that is laying on the ground because you can't get low enough to be able to strike them. So with this technique here, it is a punch. We're striking with the first two knuckles. We're punching down. I don't know if you want to call this a 45-degree angle. It's probably a little bit steeper than that. But punching down, you can see the hand finishing a little bit in front of my leg, slightly. Front knee bent, back leg straight, because it is walking stance. And coming downward like this. So some schools will call this low punch. Some will call it downward punch. Always performed in reverse stance here. There really wouldn't be much use for doing it in a conventional stance because you need to have, the target needs to be here to be able to hit them with this technique. Otherwise your foot just gets in the way. So I've only ever seen it performed reverse. So when we do this technique, it's going to be performed this way here, reverse stance. So from here, stepping forward and drive that punch down. And again, looking where you're striking. So this is another thing where, I don't know if I've touched on this in other videos, but you're always looking where you're striking. You don't have to look where you're striking before you strike that area, but when you are in the act of striking, you should be looking at the target as you're hitting the target. So in this case, if I want to punch down, I'm going to be looking here at the target when I strike. I'm not going to be looking up like this, right? I'm looking down at the target that I'm striking. So I'm looking at the target that I'm hitting. So I don't have to look at it beforehand, right? I can look wherever I want to, but at the time that I'm striking, I'm looking down at the target as I hit. So downward punch, again looking from the side. So again, a slightly longer walking stance. We simply call it long walking stance. And we also use this stance when we're doing high punch to really reach it out and stretch on those high punches. But here, especially on downward punch, it's critical. So here, this gets you down low enough to get to your target. So turning around, this is downward punch. So practicing by count, downward punch. 2, 3, turn around. 2, again, same principle applies. Your hand starts here, don't have it sagging down at the hip. Get it high and tight, like this, high and tight. Rotate the fist over as you come to the target so that when you're striking, your fist is horizontal. Not like this, but like this. So, this is downward punch or low punch in a walking stance.